The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Kraynak.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it. Weekend editions here. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Kraynak, Elijah Herbal back together again for a glorious Saturday morning. Some Big Red football to talk. And, you know, not proud of this, but we're talking Hurrdat Chitty Chin Chin. Slid into the chair. A lot of baseball yesterday for the Schmidt family. Kraynak, I know you are kind of knocking the dirt off the cleats this morning, brother. And you're
more this weekend. Tournament time.
It is the season. Elijah Herbal is going to keep rolling his sleeves up. Him and Dolman took care of it yesterday. So we have a day off today from baseball. And then we go back at it on Sunday. But man, we just got trounced by Millard West last night. It was not a good thing. They tend to do that to folks, specifically if you've already beaten them once this year. And man, it's time to get after it. You think revenge is as thick at the high school level as maybe some college programs? Think about those rivalry games that there's been a drought. And, man, the fan base really wants to get in there and get a victory. And Nebraska's got a couple of nice candidates this year on the schedule, Kraynak.
You know, well, you mean like the Big Ten in general? I mean, come on.
If you want to zoom out completely, we can, sure.
Let's go. I mean, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. What's Nebraska for the last 11? 12?
Well, yeah, it's been
around there.
You beat Minnesota in
2018.
2018.
Then it was Hoodie Gate.
Yeah, you beat Iowa in 2014, and then you beat Wisconsin in 2011.
So it's more than 0-12 by now. Ooh, what is that record?
Well, you're 0 for against whiskey.
So that's going back to 2012.
Yeah, so you're 0
and 10.
Yep, 0 and 10 against Wisconsin.
And then for Iowa, you would be 0 and 8.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you're 1 and 2 against Minnesota. And quite frankly, if they come into your place with 33 players because of COVID and still win, that should count double.
That's probably why Adrian Martinez transferred to Kansas State.
Has this been a thing with you this week?
And for folks that didn't keep up on it, but I think most Nebraska fans would have.
You have that audio, Elijah?
I can get it.
Yeah.
He openly said that he wanted to transfer to Kansas State because he wanted to win and he wanted to go to a bowl game. You know, and tough to argue with him in some ways. But at the same time, it's just kind of like, bro, you're kind of a big part of why that does or does not happen. Like, you just are.
That's the question, right? And I think this, and he's had a couple of different sit downs. Adrian has, right, with his now his time at K-State. And the headline is worse than the sound, okay? Mm-hmm. It's absolutely looks worse than sounds worse with Adrian.
Right. And I believe that. I believe that.
We'll play that here for you in 2 seconds.
Bill made a great point on the show yesterday that we were talking, and he made a point which I couldn't refute, which is the fact that this is now probably the third time this offseason we've had a moment of Nebraska fans saying, is this Adrian Martinez throwing shade back at the Husker program? What's he doing here? And then he compared that to, all of Casey Thompson's appearances. You've never seen that and gone, well, is he throwing shade at Texas here?
He hasn't said a word about Texas.
And that could have ended very ugly for him. That could have been an ugly divorce for Casey Thompson from Texas with how it ended with the coaching staff, with new quarterbacks coming.
Well,
he hasn't said a word about
Casey,
Texas or even like alluding to Texas.
Casey Thompson pretty much got lied to. And then they still, I guess we got to use you because the other guy we once hurt. And all he did was go ball. He couldn't play defense. It's not his fault. He's allowing 50 a game. I mean, think about that. So that is different. But, I mean, Adrian's been part of the media world. I mean, his podcast was on our network or is on our network, Hurrdat. So,
well, that's why I go, okay, one slip up where you go, is he does he have a bad taste in his mouth from Nebraska because there's one thing he said? But we're at 3 now this offseason.
Okay.
Well, so the other one was the most. This is the most talent I've ever played on. Mm-hmm. When he was talking about Kansas State.
Has there been 3?
And then there was the one on his own podcast where he went and talked about how it ended at Nebraska, and you got the taste, like the feel of like, there's a bad taste in his mouth here.
Well, both sides just needed a fresh start, right? You're Adrian. 2019 happens where you're jerked around. You're hurt. You're benched. 2020 occurs, and you're playing hurt. 2021, you're playing with a broken jaw, and then here's the reveal about, oh yeah, now they know I have a broken jaw, right? That was the first part of the 3 we're talking about. Adrian telling us his story in his own words about having the broken jaw, and then that being told during a broadcast, and then also touched on before his family knew, right? I mean, before, and then the post game part. I think it was after Ohio State, wasn't it, Kraynak? Purdue or Ohio State?
I believe so.
Ohio State. The kid's done it all, and he has. And God, it's tough to separate his liability versus team liability because you go as your quarterback goes.
But when you say this is the team that has the most talent that I've ever played on, talking about Kansas State, that's indirect shade. Mm-hmm. Saying I want to transfer because I want to win. I want to go to a bowl game. Well, at that point is where you can just kind of be like, all right, dude, that's enough. Like, that's enough. I thought it was kind of a mutual, amicable parting of ways, but like, okay.
Oh,
absolutely. Let's just kind of let's stop there, and let's stop worrying, by the way, too, in Nebraska about Adrian's feelings. I'm sorry, but like, there's maybe a little too much palace intrigue once we start going into the mindset of Adrian and his feelings.
Here's what needs to happen.
Good for your feelings, dude. Like, cool.
Nebraska needs to win 7 or 8 ball games. K-State needs to finish 3rd in the the Big 12, and let's just see each other down in Arizona for a bowl game.
Oh man, that would be uncomfortable for a lot of people.
That'd be uncomfortable? That'd be awesome.
That'd be incredibly juicy
for a lot of people. It'd be uncomfortable.
No, well, and God, yeah, and I don't dwell. I mean, on it. I mean, you're shocked that a guy with as many starts as him would move on. Totally shocked, but not really. And I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but I absolutely get it, especially if Nebraska needs to find alternative options at quarterback because what had been going on here was not working.
See, yeah, this is the kind of transfer that would be shocking in the landscape of college football 10 years ago.
Right. Not now. This is
not a shocking transfer by any means anymore, and I'd even say it was expected after how last season.
Sure. No. Well, and it's been this back and forth, Mark and Elijah. With member back. Do you want him back or not? I mean, that was the question.
Yeah. Well, and it would be shocking if Nebraska was 8-4 last year, 9-3. Right. If they finally turned the corner and everything was working out, then it would be like, whoa, now you're leaving. Like, that's crazy. But no, after 4 straight years of it just not working out, and in the win-loss column, it's actually getting worse. Mm-hmm. Not surprising at all, well, and needed to happen.
Right.
I just could not imagine after the year, the way it ended, and after the assistants that got let go, you're just like, there's no way you run it back with him, right? Like, it's just, I just couldn't even possibly fathom it. So it's not surprising in that way, but it is a little surprising. Maybe it's not surprising, though, because Adrian does have these podcasts, and he does have – he's a good interview. He talks, right? Like, he actually speaks. So he's not a man of few words. He talks a lot.
Well, it's reality radio a lot, or reality media. It's incredible.
Right. Well, and when you talk a lot, you're gonna say some things that make people mad. I don't know. Benefit of the doubt that he's not doing this as an intentional way to throw shade at Nebraska, but instead is answering questions in context or discussing things in context, and indirectly it's shady towards Nebraska.
The way I feel about it is it's how are you taking it as a Nebraska fan? Adrian's asked and answered, and he's being honest. Here is Adrian's comments that we're talking about, part of the podcast when it comes to talent and winning and the transfer.
And their narratives I'm fighting against. Yeah. Well, I haven't been to a bowl game, and I haven't had a winning season, Now, football is a team sport, but I play quarterback, and oftentimes, you get associated with those kind of things, and, I want to win. I want to go play in a bowl game, and I want to win a bowl game. So that was another reason why I came here. I feel like we have a great opportunity to win. And that's something, if I do and I play the right way, I know we're going to have an opportunity to do. Part of that's not turning over the ball as much. Part of that is being accurate all the time, making the right decisions. And that comes with playing quarterback, yes, but, I feel confident in this system and with the progressions I've made that I'll be able to take that next step.
So there's plenty of accountability there when it comes to making plays, not turning the football over, what he needs to do. The talent around him, since 2019, it's been problematic either to get protection, have a solid run game, or a reliable run game for Nebraska, not named Wandale. Think about this. You want to know who did all the damage on the ground last year? 573 was Adrian. The guy played hurt. The guy made some wonderful plays. The guy also had 3 of the 4 were horrible picks against Purdue, right? And another air quote winnable game in Lincoln. So it's messy is what it is. And the more that's said, the more the Nebraska fan base may take as an insult, or you may look at it and say it's a kid being honest and best to him. I'm looking at him more so than anything. Best to you. Go get some wins. Let's see you in a bowl game and settle it on the field. And thanks for your time in Lincoln, dude, because you're a stand-up guy.
Yeah. Time to move on, right?
I know. We touched on this. We touched on this briefly this week. We didn't dwell on it overly, but it's a fair Saturday morning chat moment for sure.
Absolutely. But I think maybe July 1st we impose a moratorium. Maybe July 1st. What do you think?
Okay, the Adrian moratorium?
Yeah, you get into the back half of the year and you're just sort of like, okay, it's over now.
That's fine. I say this though. If there's more that comes out, can we lift the moratorium?
Yeah, we can, because you know what? The dude is going to be putting up video game numbers, I bet. Well, I really do think he will.
Don't kid yourself.
He's going to the Big 12. Think about this. He's going to the Big 12. Kansas State's got a fairly stable program. They got a pretty productive offense. And now you're putting him in the Big 12. Like, they haven't had his level of athlete at quarterback since, Michael Bishop or something? It's been L. Roberson. You got to go way back.
Look at you going with the Michael Bishop reference.
But seriously, you have to go way back when you think of K-State having just a,
who's that
game breaker type
that got drafted by the Buccaneers?
Oh, no.
Freeman?
Josh Freeman.
Josh Freeman.
That's also another sticking point with Nebraska fans because he was headed to Lincoln. And then
but Freeman wasn't an incredible athlete. He was a good athlete.
He's a good quarterback.
But yeah, he's right. He was big size. He was more like he was big size guy.
He's a pro style dude.
But I'm talking somebody that'll just juke you, somebody that's got top end breakaway speed. Like, there's not a lot of quarterbacks like that. Period. Which is why it was so frustrating that Adrian couldn't win with him, because you're like, dude, that's as fast as you're going to ever get a quarterback. Like, it's just they don't make them faster than that. And his size was perfect. His arm was pretty good. His jukes were good. He's pretty tough. You're just
He's
like, how does
tough.
that not translate?
No, the lasting legacy and label for Adrian Martinez is Husker tough to me. Was he perfect? No. Did he have the most help around him? No. Did he cost you some games? Yeah. Did he try and win them for you single-handedly? Too many times? Yeah. But he was put in that position because of a lot of instances than the other 10 around him. Look at his pressure rate last year, for God's sake. Every time the guy dropped back to throw, he had someone in his face. I mean, 7 sacks by Michigan State. I mean, he was Houdini, man, a lot of times. This more so this last season than previously in his career. We'll move on from Adrian. It's a weekend edition of Hail Varsity Radio. Matt Schick will join us. The Rewind, a little college baseball and Nebraska football thoughts with Schick on the way. So we're just kind of walking along this month of June, and lo and behold, here comes a lawsuit from USA Today, Kraynak. Did we lose him?
Mark?
Yeah, I guess so.
He says he's still here. Did he get up?
He just texted me. Power outage.
Oh.
That's wonderful. But USA Today on Friday filed a public records law against the University of Nebraska's Director of Records for denying a request to provide details about the metrics outlined in Scott Frost's and Fred Hoiberg's restructured contracts. You have another outlet, of course, the Journal Star, filing a public records request seeking the same information. They were also denied. Then the appeal happened with the Nebraska Attorney General's office. There's a letter dated December 13th. Assistant Attorney General Elizabeth O'Gow concluded the requested document could be lawfully withheld under Nebraska's public records statutes. And the lawsuit filed Friday afternoon in Lancaster County District Court over the denial of the reporter's request. The records related to the metrics mutually agreed to in the head football and basketball coaches' restructured contracts. So the long and short, publicly, do you want to know what the metrics are from Trev Alberts? Do you want to know that going in to the basketball season? Do you want to know that going in to football? I think we're all kind of intrigued. I think we've done our own math on what needs to happen, and Nebraska needs to not only get to a bowl game, but also needs to look like it belongs in a bowl game. All right? What's the momentum of the program like? Are you losing football games in close fashion? That happens to really good teams in the Big Ten that are buttoned up. But are you sloppy and losing? Does that continue? For basketball, is there any whiff of a defensive side of the court? For basketball, are you competing in the Big Ten? You can finish anywhere from 1 to 9 and still get into the NCAA tournament. I don't think the NCAA tournament is make or break for Fred. Absolutely not. But he's been here long enough. Problem is it's been a revolving door and a roster reset every year where you've ran out and filled your roster.
I mean, we've spent so much time talking about what Scott Frost has to do this year in order to keep
I haven't
his
even
job.
thought about Fred yet.
Yeah, is it an NIT type season? Is that what Fred Hoiberg needs? Is it just finish in the top 10 in the Big Ten?
Be competitive in the Big Ten on the hardwood and be vying for some sort of postseason. And if they NIT it, I think that'd be incredible. I think it's just hard to do when you keep flip-flopping your roster. The problem is this wasn't the approach from day one. It's X number of years later now, right? And that's, well, you can have a new staff and you can maybe change your approach. If Fred and Trev are on the same page about, all right, how long is that going to take? I misstepped here. This isn't how things worked at Iowa State compared to what the reality was at Nebraska with all the transfers. That's my bad. I need to readjust and recalculate, and Fred's done that with his staff and his assistants and some of the kids they went out to get. Sam Griesel specifically, right? I mean, that's a dude you want to add, and I know it's a transfer, but Fred Griesel's a dude that can really help bring some stability to a locker room. I think that's been the biggest part of Nebraska's issue. It's not been talent. You're going to have a third guy, three guys in 4 years, two under Fred's watch that are going to be picked in the NBA. You'll have McGowans. You had Banton, and he didn't get a chance to coach Roby, but Roby went in the second round. All right, so it's not like Nebraska's not had some talent. It's not like Nebraska's not gone out and gotten top 100 or top 150 either JUCO or portal guys. They've done a good job of that. It's just never the old presentations not matched what the recipe ingredients have supposed to have been. So that's where we're at there. I have in my mind what it looks like if you're winning single digits in the Big Ten again. See ya. This ain't working. All right. If you're looking more so like the end of the year in the Big Ten basketball race, like, you know how Nebraska kind of surprised? Ooh, you won 2 or 3.
I mean, they've done that the past 2 years.
I know. And now you get your poop in a group. Well, where's that been all season with the same talent? So the approach is going to be different. It's going to be more focused on toughness and defense, and here's the offensive system, and do we have the right guys to run it, and and coachable guys that are willing to run it.
So would you say that your metric for Fred Hoiberg for this season is less so an actual metric and less so wins and losses, and more so the eye test, how this team looks? Does it look like Fred Hoiberg, based on how he's constructed this roster, has a plan for winning in the Big Ten? Is that where you're coming from here?
I think eye test is more important to me in football than it is in basketball.
Okay.
Because I think they'll immediately look different, and I think the wins will follow in basketball with some of the talent they have. But both locker rooms got to get buy-in. All right, period. With how there's a way about going and doing your business in the Big Ten and getting wins that way. If you do what you're supposed to do, it will translate to wins in the Big Ten, because that's how Wisconsin's done it, that's how Iowa's done it, that's how Minnesota's done it, and you have your exceptions to the rule. Yeah, they have their process of beating the hell out of you on the hardwood or the football field, but they can also out-talent you and don't have to be perfect in a lot of instances if you're Ohio State or even Michigan. We'll step away and get geared up for a rewind segment. We'll reconnect with Kraynak. He's dealing with a power outage. Weekend edition continues. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Hello, listener. Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with Hail Varsity Radio, and I wanted to let you know about a special deal just for listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast. We're offering $10 off the annual subscription price. That means that you can get everything we do. 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all the premium content we produce at HailVarsity.com. Just go to HailVarsity.com/subscribe and enter in the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's HailVarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
With Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery, with Chris Schmidt and Mark Kraynak.
Back into it at Hail Varsity Radio. That laugh is familiar. We say hi to Matt Schick of Schick and Nick, and of course ESPN Radio, ESPN TV, Sirius XM. Mr. Schick, good to talk to you. It's not quite been 644 days, but it's around there.
Something like that, exactly. Yeah, it's been a while. Good to chat with you, Schmidt. How are you, buddy?
We're good. We are ready for baseball at the Schmidt household. You're ready for baseball on the super regional front, and we'll go there. And some tasty matchups. If you had to circle one of these supers that you're most intrigued by, which one?
Of all the supers that intrigues me the most, I am going with North Carolina against Arkansas. I think that one is pretty tasty, not necessarily for the environment, but because there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent on both sides. North Carolina can pitch. They got a really good freshman, Advance Honeycutt, who if he gets to Omaha, he might steal the show. He's a 25 home run, 30 stolen bases player, and he's a freshman. He's built. He's just a really good kid. Who I talked to Scott Forbes, the North Carolina coach, this morning actually, and he said he's unlike any player he's ever coached in terms of the gifts and everything he's got. And then for an Arkansas team that, you know, the Dave Van Horn angle is always there, trying to get back to Omaha again. Think about where they were a couple of years ago. They dropped the fly ball that would have won them a championship. Last year they lose in the Supers to NC State after putting up 20-plus runs in the first game of the Super. So there's a lot there, and it's an Arkansas team that has found out who it is. They gave up a ton of runs against Oklahoma State, but at the same time, they went through the war. Connor Nolan can pitch. Michael Turner, transfer from Kent State at catcher. Peyton Stovall trying to become who they thought he could be. And Caden Wallace at third has got a hose, man. I mean, he can really play. So that would probably be the one. And then a backup, maybe the 2A. The 1A would be Texas and East Carolina, because I love the quote-unquote little guy, which ECU is not. They're a good baseball team and a good baseball power, but welcoming in Texas, it's rare for a team like ECU to be able to host a super regional against a national power program like a Texas. And for ECU, the storyline of never making it to Omaha despite 32 appearances, that's great. I mean, sign me up for both of those, and that place is going to be absolutely wild at Clark LeClaire Stadium.
I want to go back to Arkansas. That drama around the program was pretty thick. There was a lot of strife, even from some media towards Turner. That was a couple of weeks ago, and man, they have battled through. Turner had an incredible regional. And there's that soft spot for a lot of Nebraska fans. I know it's damn near 20 years, but for Van Horn to get back to Omaha. So they've been so close, and they're that program that you expect to win it that hasn't. Oregon State's always interesting. We've had a lot of fun with Pat Casey over the years. I know he's been gone from there, but Oregon State's fun to watch. And then A&M with their transition, they're right back knocking on the door, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, go back to Michael Turner. So, yeah, you referenced Arkansas, and then a sports talk radio guy who bashed him. And I covered an Arkansas game and talked to Dave Van Horn about him earlier this season. And when they played Missouri, and going into that game, he's just like, yeah, I can't believe he's not playing pro ball. You know, COVID happened, and the draft was shortened, and so he transfers from Kent State. And he's making himself some money this year. He goes 8 for 18 in the regional with 11 runs batted in and 5 runs scored. And he's a really good defensive player as well. So that Dave Van Horn story and Arkansas story, they look like a team that could get through Chapel Hill. They really, really do. The Texas A&M, angle there is interesting. Louisville and what they did to escape Michigan, as the replay should have been overturned. It should have been Michigan taking a 2-run lead into the ninth, and then maybe it's Michigan going to Texas A&M, which would have been outstanding. But it's not. It's Louisville. And Louisville, and Cam Masterman, the player who hit a big home run against Michigan, said, we have nothing to lose. He said that going into Texas A&M. And when you've got a really good team that if the rest of the team feels like that, they're not feeling pressure, We're playing with house money, so to speak, because we're going into the higher-ranked seed, the better team, quote-unquote. I like Louisville's chances to go in there. I think Texas A&M's a fairly vulnerable top 5 seed.
Matt Schick with us from ESPN. Find him on Twitter at ESPN_Schick. Also, Schick and Nick with the Hurrdat Family Podcast. It's a must-listen to each week. And Matt, going to dive into some Nebraska football because it is the off-season. Athlon has come out with their prognostications. How does number 5 in the West grab you for Nebraska?
Is that what they have?
Yes, they have Nebraska in at 5. They have Wisconsin 1, Purdue in at 2, and they return Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, and they've got a couple of Iowa transfers in at wide receiver. In at 3 is Iowa, Minnesota in at 4. And then there's the Big Reds sneaking in at number 5. Storm clouds are just a tough black and blue division where anything can happen any week.
Well, I'll tell you, Purdue's going to be a trendy pick going into this season, and they're going to have the opener to figure out whether they're contender or not because they open up a Thursday night at home against Penn State. So how do they look? You'll get a really good gauge, but their schedule's very, very friendly. It's a friendly schedule with many winnable games. I've said this about Nebraska that you pick them anywhere from 2 to 5, and you're probably going to be right. Okay, like either if they go 5th in the division, I think we all know what might happen there at the end of the season. The first half of their schedule is so extremely manageable that you have to stockpile wins early for them because the back half is going to be a really big challenge. And, Nick and I on our podcast were talking about it this week about, is 6 wins enough for Frost? And the knee-jerk is, yeah, 6 wins is enough. That's tangible evidence that things are going well. But then the more you think about it, you realize that if they go 6-6, but they start off hot, maybe even if it's 4-2, 5-1, which their schedule indicates that's very likely, and I think anything short of 5-1, 4-2 at the least would be really disappointing. If they go 6-6, then they're going 2-4 on the back end or 1-5 on the back end. And if that happens, you got no momentum. And not all 6-6 schedules are created equal. And so that's where I would be a little cautious. FPI, if you're into the ESPN Football Power Index, says 8-4. And that's probably where I would peg, probably 7-5 to play it safe, just because there are so many unknowns. And I know for that opening game, it's 9.5 for 10 Northwestern. That's just too many unknowns for Nebraska to feel any semblance of confidence. And any that you feel is based on last year and the close games. But a switch, so many switches and so many different coaches, 5 new coaches, 15 new players, and a bunch of those transfers have got to hit. The stability aspect for Nebraska is not there. They don't check that box. But do they check the box at quarterback? Compared to Minnesota, maybe. Compared to Purdue, I don't think so. Compared to Wisconsin, I actually think they might. Compared to Iowa, yes, they absolutely do. So I think in the quarterback check box, it might be there. It might be a push on a couple of teams, but it's probably going to be there. How does the rest of the team look? No clue. There's just too many unknowns.
Matt Schick joining us a few minutes here, Hail Varsity Radio. You mentioned momentum. That's so key, and just think back to year 1, how Nebraska finished. They went 4-8, but they won that Michigan State game. They won a couple of other ball games. They beat Minnesota rather handily, and you felt good going into 2019 to the point where, back to June talk, right, they were picked to win the West, and that didn't go so well. They've not closed against Iowa. Defensively, there's some new faces. You got a front four to figure out, aside from Ty Robinson, with some big time names that came from some really good programs. But Matt, I'm just wondering about chemistry. Can it all mesh, and can you get players on the same page during these summer months, along with the offensive side of the football, the coaching staff on the same side, and then put both of those together and be off and running? Is it too big a ask, or the Mel Tucker comparison? Look what Sparty did a year ago with that portal, and they went 11-2. Tucker's been really good in short amount of spurts wherever he's been. We'll see how Sparty follows up, but I'm interested if Nebraska can do a second act with it. They're going to have to ease some tension here towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think of Michigan State. I think this year, if they win 9 games, that's a huge achievement. I think there's a step back here. I think you go back to last year and you can poke some holes in what they did, but you know what? You flip a coin and you call heads, and it lands heads 4 out of 5 times. You're going to win a bunch of games, and that's what they did. Nebraska called tails, and it landed heads. There were a bunch of those 50-50 games late, and a bunch of those were self-inflicted wounds. It was a double-sided coin, and Nebraska knew they were using it and couldn't get out of their own way. So to your point about back in 2018, if Nebraska they won 4 of their last 6, right? But if they had won 4 of their first 6, and then the front of the schedule happened at the end, you wouldn't be feeling how you felt going into 2019. So the order of things absolutely matters for momentum. But like you said, it doesn't, not necessarily from season to season, but from game to game. There was that build, and then for some reason it just dropped off. I would say that for the chemistry here, you just thank God there's no COVID this year, right? Like that, like with all this new chemistry, imagine if that hit, you're going through this in 2020. Like, you got to figure this stuff out. You got to get guys together. You got to forge some bonds here with a bunch of guys that are frankly mercenaries that are here to try and save a program and save themselves and increase their draft stock and go to a better landing spot. I mean, these are, in a lot of ways, some of these players are cast-offs that maybe didn't fit where they were, and now you got to fit, and you got to all fit together. And Michigan State did what it did in large part because Kenneth Walker III was the best player at his position in the country. Does Nebraska have a player like that could get you a win, that could steal a W, that could be the best player on the field? Ndamukong Suh could be that guy in the front 7 that can cover up for a bad offense like they did and come a second away from a conference championship. Does Nebraska have a guy in the front 7 that can wreck a game? Do they have someone offensively that can wreck a game? I don't think they do. But I also think it's going to take time, and you're going to have to allow this program to not just recruit transfers, but to recruit high school players. And I think they'll be able to do that, which is why it's imperative that this staff wins 7 or more games so that they give them another year or 2 to do just that, because I think this is a really good coaching staff. And I hope they get more than 1 year, and I hope they hit the ground running.
Well, you look at what Trev might be thinking and seeing how 2022 goes. You've made some incredible hires. Bill Bush, Mickey Joseph, 2 specifically that have a just phenomenal track record of recruiting and development, and they've worked for some heavy hitters. Coach Applewhite isn't as well known, but that dude's really good. Really good. Was really good at TCU. So you don't want an 03 scenario to happen where you make staff changes and then you don't get a longer runway, but you're working on year 5. So it's interesting, isn't it, with what needs to be happening in Lincoln. You bring in some big name coaches that can help you get there, but you want to see the next year and years after.
Like, if you make a change after this year, you're 4 coaches in 10 years.
Yeah.
Like if you really think about it, and Trev Alberts has preached stability. So Trev Alberts, and knowing him and hearing what he has to say, is not going to be the kind of guy that goes, okay, I'm just looking at wins and losses. He's going to look at what kind of improvements are we making, and are there signs that this thing is moving? Are there signs within games that it's moving? What's the sign of improvement this year? Playing better in the last 2 minutes instead of playing worse, right? Playing your best football in the fourth quarter instead of crumbling. Making those special teams, capitalizing on special teams instead of cashing in your chips on special teams. And that's why I think the 2 biggest transfers are Bleak Road and Buschini. I mean, if those guys are upgrades, if you can get your kicker and punter squared away and they're not costing you games and they're a net even for Nebraska, then I think this team is at the minimum making a bowl game. And they would have made one last year with those 2 guys if those guys are upgrades or just a neutral asset. Then figure it out. And that's where the frustration comes in. So, yeah, I think it's going to be just every week is going to be an adventure. And who would have thought 20, 25 years ago that you'd be sitting here thinking, geez, 6 games would be great. But life comes at you fast, man, and that's kind of where Nebraska is.
Matt Schick with us, ESPN, and, of course, Schick and Nick. Matt, a thought here before we say goodbye while we're into projections and predictions. How your Bills going to be, man?
I'm a little leery of this preseason. They're the best team in the NFL. I think people like to really get ahead of themselves. I think they're there. I think they're close. I think it's like a coin flip thing, right? You win that coin toss against Kansas City, maybe you're winning the Super Bowl. Things happen quickly. I do think that they are a top 5 team, and I think that, anything short of home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the AFC would be a big disappointment. I think Kansas City takes a half step back. He always looks like Nebraska in the West. Who's taking a step forward, who's taking a step back, and how does that impact your steps that you're making? I think the Bills will be just as good as they were last year, and then how's everyone else thinking? Tyreek Hill, you take him away from Kansas City, I'm not as scared. So give me Buffalo, give me AFC Championship, give me Super Bowl, or don't even play the season, Schmidt. That's where we're at here.
There you go. All or nothing. Love it. Matt Schick with us. Matt, take care. Thanks so much for a few minutes.
Appreciate it, buddy. Any single time. Thank you.
Pardon the interruption, but I'd like to save you some money. I'm Brandon Vogel, managing editor of Hail Varsity, and I wanted to offer listeners of this podcast $10 off the price of an annual subscription. That means that you can get everything we produce, 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all the premium content we produce at hailvarsity.com. Just go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe and enter the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's hailvarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
Early to rise with Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Here's Chris Schmidt and Mark Kraynak.
Thanks for hanging out. Weekend edition is here. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. You can stream, as always, ESPNLincoln.com, the podcast. We really appreciate you checking out the podcast, Hail Varsity Radio, and can find that Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and the on-demand segments, ESPNLincoln.com. On demand, where you go with that. The SoundCloud, the 2-minute drill portion that Elijah does an amazing job with. That's ESPN Lincoln's Twitter and ESPN Lincoln's Facebook. In hour 2, we'll spend some time with Brandon Vogel, managing editor, HailVarsity.com and magazine. And then the Iron Horse will be with us, Gary Sharp. We spent time this last hour. Adrian Martinez, how are you taking his comments as a Nebraska fan? Not to belabor this, but it's in the news this week with his appearance on a podcast, and also a sit-down interview with an outlet that covers K-State football. And I don't see him as throwing shade. He's answering direct questions, and it's time to move on, is what I say with it. Now, to your point, Elijah, you and Bill Dolman touched on the fact that, it's now 3 times that he's been, but he's always going to be asked about Nebraska until he's not asked about Nebraska by somebody who gets to sit down with him. So Kraynak's trying to connect.
No sound makes me want to pick up something more than the Skype sound, because I just want that call sound to end.
Yeah,
I want to pick that thing up immediately.
You hate that ding ding ding. Do we have Mr. Kraynak? Kraynak, did you survive the power outage? Did you dive into the canned goods, my friend, in your safe room? Do we have him?
Says we do. I think I hear him in the background. Maybe he's setting up his equipment still.
Yeah, maybe he is.
Maybe he doesn't have his headphones on. Yeah, they're all possibilities.
Right. Well, hour 2 will move forward and have that gorgeous voice of Mark Kraynak. Also spent some time with Matt Schick there, Schick and Nick podcast, Hurrdat Family Media Network, and, of course, his take on the Big Red. And quarterback play going to be so vital. Is it the most vital? Brandon Vogel will answer that. We'll get some thoughts as summer heats up. Gabe Ervin Jr. spent time with the network this week, says he's fully healthy, ready to go. Where's he figure in the running back race? Hour 2's next weekend edition, Hail Varsity, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Like what you hear? High-quality radio and podcast is part of what we do at Hail Varsity. Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with Hail Varsity Radio, and I wanted to offer listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast $10 off the price of an annual subscription. That means that you can get everything we do. 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all the premium content we produce at HailVarsity.com. Just go to HailVarsity.com/subscribe and enter in the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's HailVarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday Morning Show, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Kraynak.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Back with you, it's Hour 2 weekend editions here. It's Hail Varsity Radio, presented by the Nebraska Lottery. Chris Schmidt, Mark Kraynak, Elijah Herbal, as we are off and running this gorgeous Saturday morning. And we say hi to the managing editor with HailVarsity.com and magazine, author also with John Cook, Brandon L. Vogel with us, and Brandon L. Vogel on Twitter. Vogues, we aren't streaming in this morning, but are you set up in the football office? We have done shows with you front and center with the stoic backdrop of the Vogue's office. We saw Babbers earlier this week, Mike Babcock in his office, and that's always kind of a cool setting and seed. What's your coolest football relic in your office?
Good question. I mean, I don't have a ton of football relics. I mean, it's mostly just books. My favorite, weird football book that I got at a secondhand store in, Central Texas a while ago is called Dementia Pigskin, which it's so hard to explain that I'm not even going to try, but it's from the 1930s or so, and it's about how football makes sports fans crazy. I love that book, and I try to reread it actually about every year about this time as I'm starting to get ramped up for football to get here. So that's the pick for this morning, at least.
Dementia football. So how, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10 of crazy, how crazy is this season going to be? I mean, and Vogues, and for context, bud, it's been building, right, to complete breakdown because of how this tenure's gone and how the fan base, the team, the coaches, everybody wants the same thing. But, man, there has been a lot of new twists and turns with Nebraska football, and it's all got to, whatever this painting becomes, it's all got to dry and look pretty cool.
Yeah, it does. On the crazy scale, it's probably, on the potential crazy scale, I should say, it's probably about as high as I can remember for a recent Nebraska season. When you look at all of the turnover, both on the roster and in the offices, in terms of the assistant coaches, you also have, and I wrote about this a little bit in the yearbook. We talk about how every season, or maybe we don't talk about it. My feeling is every season at Nebraska, given its proud football history, can feel a little bit must win, right? But in actuality, this is probably the biggest must-win season that I can recall, just because we don't know exactly what happens, but something changes on October 1st. A voluntary contract reduction and buyout reduction happens at that point. That is real, tangible evidence that something needs to change because there are already consequences for it. So I think you add those things all together, and just kind of the wild nature of Nebraska and all of these close losses over four seasons, and it adds up to it's going to be a pretty spicy stew, I think, by the time we get to fall of 2022.
Brandon, And what is your sense for when that happens, for when the season is underway and it's September? Is there a number? Is there a set of wins? Is it how competitive you are? Is it how many W's you're putting on the board? What do you think will enter the calculus for Trev Alberts?
Yeah, so that date is October 1st. Like, I don't view that as D-Day by any means. It's just sort of after that point, D-Day could potentially come. And you look at you look at Nebraska's schedule, which I'm always hesitant because, some teams on there are going to be potentially vastly better than anyone would project. I mean, Michigan State's win total was 4 or 4.5 going into 2022. I mean, that was a win that if you looked at Nebraska's schedule last year at the end of September, you probably said, well, that's a game Nebraska can win. And it almost did. So it's tough to schedule watch, but I was talking with Steve Marek as he was working on some things, kind of looking at the best version of this Nebraska season upcoming and the worst version for some stories that are upcoming. And going through some of the power rankings and inferred win probabilities, Nebraska has about, based on my calculation, about a 10% chance to get to 8-0. To go 4-0 over those last 4 games, it has about a 1% chance. And I can't remember a schedule that kind of had that clean of a break in recent memory. So, based on who they play and what we would guess about kind of the point spread for those games, 10% to get to 8-0, only a 1% chance to go 4-0 against Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa, which makes sense, but it just kind of outlines the stark difference of how much work I think Nebraska has to get done over the first basically 2/3 of this season.
Brandon Vogel's with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Brandon, you mentioned that October 1st date. That's actually the day Nebraska plays Indiana. That's Game 5. So tell me, in your estimation, you said it's not D-Day, but what is a number in terms of win total where you think warning bells would be going off through those first 5 games if Nebraska's at that point? Is it 4-1? Is it 3-2? Where is the point where you think, well, maybe there might be some steam towards making a change at the top if Nebraska has this record?
Yeah, so if they go into that Indiana game 3-1, I think that's sort of the checkpoint of, okay, this is going well so far. That would be basically if you just took the chalk and said, well, you get Oklahoma at home, but Oklahoma probably still wins, but you get the other 3 done for Nebraska. That would be like, good. Now you can move into the second third of this season and be okay. If you're 4-0, well, things are rolling and you're feeling pretty great. 2-2, which if you look at Oklahoma, currently favored on these way early lines in that game, despite being in Lincoln, and you look at Northwestern as kind of a weird scenario in a foreign country, literally. 2-2 with context would be a little bit tough. And then that Indiana game on October 1st, like, we can look at Indiana and really fell off. I mean, they've lost 2 strength coaches to Alabama and 2 of their offensive and defensive coordinators since 2019, who are now both head coaches. That's a lot of turnover for the Hoosiers coaching staff. But I don't know. I mean, that Indiana team could be a little bit of a wild card, even if that's one of those games where we look at it now and say, oh, Nebraska's a pretty decent favorite in that game based on what we think now. So 3-1 going in, you drop that Indiana game and it sours pretty quickly. You got the rest of the month of October, I think, to really kind of get things going.
Brandon Vogel's with us from HailVarsity.com and magazine. Yearbook is going to be headed your way, your college football Bible. If you're a Nebraska fan, get that subscription now. HailVarsity.com/subscribe. It's one thing to lose a tight ball game, guys, and it's another thing to do it repeatedly. Nebraska's done that, and I think the frustrating part is the turnovers, the sloppiness, and who'd they lose to, right? I mean, that's the reaction, but now you might be a little numb to it. But Indiana shouldn't be, and I'm not saying Nebraska is this great juggernaut anymore. I'm not saying they can't become one, but you've lost to Indiana before, 2019 shootout, right? Backup quarterback was in, but still, you had a chance to seize control of that ball game. You had the crazy fumble inside the 20, and bang, there goes your momentum. You're at Rutgers. Purdue's could be really good or not live up to the hype. And then there's Illinois, and then there's Minnesota. There's some peers or some teams that you're supposed to, because you have a red end, roll out and win. That's different now, but there's still an expectation of it. So if Nebraska handles their business against some of the, dare I say, winnable games on the schedule, I mean, there's postseason. It's important to me, and I want your guys' feedback, Vogues and Kraynak and Elijah too. It's important that Nebraska starts looking the part. That's what we were talking with Matt Schick about earlier. I mean, you got to look competent at football, and you'll know when you watch Nebraska football if you're satisfied, because I think the wins will translate, Vogues.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's kind of been the story. It's been the missing piece for the last 4 years, is like Nebraska looks the part physically against certainly the rest of the Big Ten West, and it looks the part for 70 to 85% of most of these games, and then it falls apart in the 15%. And this is something I've looked at a lot, and it's nothing you can wave a magic wand over. But Nebraska's just it hasn't gotten the quick starts I think this system is built to thrive on, and quick starts are important for any football team trying to win a game. But I think this system is particularly built to thrive on it. They have to expend so much energy to get back into so many of these games that being ready to go out of the gates, and whether it's through design, whether it's through a little bit of luck, whatever it is, I mean, that would feel like such a big difference if Nebraska felt in control of these games. And I mean, it's not everything. It was in control of the Iowa game last year for 3/4 of it, and then it still collapsed. But that would go a long way to help, I think, staying out of trouble rather than having to fight to get out of trouble all the time.
Brandon Vogel is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. The thing Nebraska needs more than anything, obviously, is like some form of stability. And what's interesting to me is that, look, I don't know that you can count Chubba Purdy out. And to just even imagine that on a year that there's so much riding, like a quarterback controversy is kind of the last thing you need right now. That said, when you look at the spring game, small sample size, did Chubba Purdy not look like the most explosive athlete out of the quarterbacks and maybe kind of the most upside overall? Is that how you saw it too? And if that's the case, and if he's healthy, does he have a shot to start game one?
I think so. I mean, I definitely don't go into this summer thinking that race is settled. And I don't think it's unsettled in name only either. I mean, I know that's kind of what was said after the spring. And the spring game was tough. It was a limited sample size, of course, but it always is. I look at that, and I think Chubba Purdy does have a chance this summer to make his case. And we look at this, Nebraska's probably going to throw the football more. I think that's the expectation, and that's a fair expectation based on what Whipple has done in the past. It's a fair expectation based on the quarterbacks that they brought in Casey Thompson and Chubba Purdy. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that race remains there. I mean, I think Thompson's still the favorite based on you can compare him directly to Purdy, but also just a little bit of his experience. So game one might be – I would be surprised if Purdy started game one of the season, but I don't think who will for that opener. I don't know if they're not going to have a very long leash in terms of the games that follow.
Brandon Vogel's with us here, Brandon, and I mean, also, you got to, I think, factor in Logan Smothers to the conversation as well. Not necessarily as a starter, but as a guy who could get some spot time. I mean, I think back to what they tried to do with McCaffrey a few years ago, where they'd get him in and utilize him where they can. But my question to you is, how big do you think this backup race is going to be? I mean, we were talking yesterday on the show. I think it's safe to assume that rolling out for week 0 against Northwestern, Casey Thompson's going to be the guy. But Nebraska, I don't even know when the last time they had their starting quarterback play all 12 games in a season. I mean, they were close last year until the final game with Adrian Martinez where Logan Smothers had to step in against Iowa. I mean, the backup quarterbacks had to come in and start a game for Nebraska, I believe, each of the past 5 or 6 seasons. So how important is this backup quarterback race going to be?
I think it's pretty big for the reason that you mentioned, because I can't think of either. Maybe one of those early Tommy Armstrong seasons. Did he get all 12 in? I don't remember because we remember some of the later ones where he was unable to go, of course. But also because I very much enter this season thinking, okay, Nebraska's got 3 quarterbacks who potentially could start, I think, and that's almost a unicorn in today's college football. You don't see it very often, and we'll see if they can maintain that. But to kind of go back to what we were talking about maybe in the first part of this segment, like, it's so clear that there's so much pressure here that you don't really have the luxury of, okay, if Casey Thompson is the guy and it's a little bit middle of the road, maybe even a little below average, I don't think you can sit with that and be like, well, it's just going to take some time. Nebraska needs to get a lot of work done in the first 2 months of the season. And if that requires quarterback switching, I think it will. I don't think that's off the table by any means. So that backup race becomes really, really important because it's not just an in case of emergency scenario this season. It's a in case of lack of production, which can be a dangerous game in its own, but I think that's where Nebraska's at.
Vogues, you said the P word, my friend, pressure, and no one knows how some key cogs will handle pressure. You have so many new transfers in, either via the portal or just guys that are new to the program. But do you think getting guys from an LSU, from a Texas, from a TCU, from an Alabama will help kind of relieve some of that strain? Sorry to go Diaco there, but I'm curious. So guys from bigger and winning programs, can they help ease some of the tension that we all feel like may be pretty heavy starting across the pond?
Yeah, I don't think it hurts. Casey Thompson in terms of his Texas experience, and I guess Marcus Washington as well. Those guys played through Texas lose five straight in the middle of the season, 4 or 5.
Kansas, that Kansas game.
Yeah, and at a place like Texas, even in year 1 under a new coach, that doesn't play well. And Trey Palmer, coming from LSU, basically played through the bizarre end of the Orgeron era. And, those are volatile and difficult circumstances given what we know about kind of the rabidity of the fan bases at both of those places. Alabama, a little bit of a different deal where you're worried about losing one game and it feels like a calamity, but still there. So I think given the choice for some of these Power 5 transfers who maybe, Casey Thompson's a little bit different, but for some of these guys, they weren't the guy at their place, which is part of the reason they're in the transfer portal looking for a different situation. I'd rather have those kind of players from big-time programs, kind of the historical peers of a Nebraska or a Michigan or Ohio State, programs like that, because I do think it gets you a little more prepared for the fervor that is day in and day out around these teams in the fall.
Brandon Vogel with us on Hail Varsity Radio. You look at Nebraska's defense from last year, pretty stable unit, pretty predictable production, pretty consistent. A lot of 6-year players helps with that. Where do you expect, just like sort of percentage-wise, or even scale to 1 to 10? If Nebraska was an 8 last year on defense, where do you think they net out this year? Do they go up? Do they stay the same? Do they go down a little? What do you think?
Probably down a little. I mean, I think until we see how some of these new pieces fit, it's tough to project even maintaining. But I would be surprised, based on Shenandoah's track record so far, if there was a major drop-off. I mean, given how much Nebraska lost from that defense, there would be some places and some schools where you'd just be like, well, this is going to be pretty rough. I don't get that sense here. So, I would probably put on a 1 to 10 scale, if they were an 8, I think 6.5 is a fair expectation. So if you get to 7 or 7.5, the pass rush has a chance to be upgraded. And that's not just because of O'Shawn Mathis. That's because of guys like Garrett Nelson, being a year on in their career, being presumably a year improved. It might. They're young, and you had 2 guys back there that played a ton of football, so I don't want to take that for granted. But I think there's a chance Nebraska could be upgraded at safety. And you get a pass rush, and you're strong up the middle, and we know that the returning linebackers are pretty strong. Like, it's not a given that this defense takes a step back. It's just too hard for me to say, I think they definitely will. But the ceiling is there for them to be as good, if not slightly better than last year, even though I say we'll probably start out with a little bit lower expectations, or at least I do.
Brandon, I like this question, so I'm going to rephrase it to you, I guess. And if we take a 3-year aggregate of the past 3 years of the special teams, on a scale of 1 to 10, there is 0. So with that in mind, what is a number on that 1 to 10 scale that you think Husker fans would be happy with from the special teams here in 2022?
Probably a 4. I think that would be for me, if I'm setting that barometer, and I would agree, on a scale of 1 to 10, Nebraska hasn't qualified for the scale to this point. Getting to 4, which would be, in the middle of the pack, basically kind of the middle 2/3 of all college football teams, and maybe your special teams still cost you a little bit there. But for the most part, they're kind of a wash. They're not winning you games, but they're not losing you games, which has been the case too frequently of late in Lincoln. That would be a very productive, I think, first year for Bill Busch. And that's another one where, similar to the defense, I feel like I can set that as a fair expectation. And if that group were to bounce to a 6 or so with some of the additions they made in the kicking game, and if you can get one of those returners, whether, Palmer presumably, to break for a touchdown at a certain point, then you're all up to a 6. And that wouldn't surprise me either. But just getting back to, just be a net neutral for Nebraska would be a pretty sizable improvement.
Vogues, we got to talk yearbook, man. It's around the corner. The yearbook party's coming up at the Hale Varsity Club towards the end of June. Excited for it, man. Finishing touches. Tell us a little bit more about the yearbook.
Yeah, so that went to print officially this week, 160 pages, so a little bit longer print time than our normal monthly issues. So still got a little bit of time before that starts arriving in people's mailboxes, but really, really excited about it. I know great story by Aaron Sorensen on him, Jacob Padilla.
Vogues, we lost you there. Do we have you back, bud?
Yeah, I got you guys.
All right, reset and go, because you were dropping. I was like me in left field trying to catch a fly ball.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so the yearbook is officially at the printer. A lot of people probably seen the cover with Garrett Nelson. Great story by Aaron Sorensen on him that I think informs some things that people may not know about Garrett. Steve Marek wrote a great profile of Quentin Newsome, really important player in 2022. Mike Babcock took on the Grateful Dead with Barrett Ruud. They are both big fans of the Grateful Dead, so that's a really fun story. Plenty of other good stuff in there as well. And, of course, position-by-position breakdowns and then the team previews, which I continue to obsess over, even though they're done.
Gotta love it, man. No, those team previews are the look-see, man. Checking out a team sold before kickoff. Gotta love it. Brandon Vogel, follow him on Twitter at Brandon L. Vogel is where you find him on Twitter. And, of course, great stuff with HailVarsity.com and magazine. Get the subscription, HailVarsity.com/subscribe. Vogues, have yourself a weekend, bud. Give Junior a fist pound and enjoy some time, man. Appreciate you making time for us this morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
There he is, Brandon Vogel with us on Hail Varsity. Kraynak, you're a football nut like a lot of us, and how cool is that yearbook cover with Garrett Nelson, and then we've talked with Babbers a little bit, but him and Rudy sitting down to talk Grateful Dead. I would bet that you at one time in your high school life probably had a Grateful Dead tie-dye, didn't you?
I had a shirt that said Grateful Red.
Well, I remember seeing that.
Remember those?
Yeah.
And it was kind of like the Dead Skull logo, but instead it had the N on it, and it was
probably a
talk about a deep track.
Yeah, was it a copyright deal or was it all good?
I don't think they ever found out.
Okay.
This was pre, social media, so nobody ever apprehended me. So it's pretty good there. I've been doing some, by the way, some little deep searches on Nebraska's receiving core. Mm-hmm. The new guys, some of the new guys that have come in, and I don't know, man. We'll have to get into that with Gary here in a little bit. I discovered some things.
Okay, well, we'll get into some things with the Iron Horse, Gary Sharp. He's next. Weekend edition continues. We're presented by the Nebraska Lottery.
Like what you hear? High-quality radio and podcasts are just part of what we do at Hail Varsity. I'm Brandon Vogel, managing editor. I wanted to offer listeners of the Hail Varsity Radio Show podcast $10 off the price of an annual subscription. That means that you can get everything we do, 10 issues of our monthly magazine, our annual football yearbook, and all of the premium content we produce at HailVarsity.com. Just go to HailVarsity.com/subscribe and enter the promo code GBR for $10 off a full year of Hail Varsity. That's HailVarsity.com/subscribe, promo code GBR.
Glad to have you back.
Yes, sir. You heard me right.
Here are the guys, Schmidt and Kraynak.
Well, Hector, here's the game plan. You're going to bring us 2 absolute martinis. You know how I like them, straight up. And then precisely 7.5 minutes after that, you're going to bring us 2 more. Then 2 more after that every 5 minutes until one of us passes out.
Excellent strategy, sir.
No passing out, not this Saturday. The Iron Horse, Gary Sharp, is in the on-deck circle. Mark Kraynak, Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbal, Weekend Edition, Hail Varsity Radio. Be sure to get the podcast, subscribe to us, give us a rating, good, bad, or ugly. We love the feedback and can do so Spotify, iTunes, or Google Play. Can join us this morning, about 30 minutes left, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. So we will effort Sharpie Claus here. Kraynak, you were diving into some receiver numbers, and we are excited to see what can happen here with Nebraska football. And the wideouts are shiny and talented. Kraynak, they are some dudes that, well, quite honestly, you really get excited about because of their skill, their talent, their speed, and visions of big plays go through a lot of Nebraska fans' heads. And what were you able to uncover a little bit, my friend? There is, I'm intrigued by it. I'm waiting for Nebraska though to be able to ground and pound again. That's another conversation. But the wideouts absolutely have a lot of question marks, and that could be a good thing.
Well, look, Nebraska added 3 transfers of note, right? Mm-hmm. You added Trey Palmer from LSU, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda from New Mexico State, Marcus Washington from Texas, right? So people that have experience and that have played. But when you look at how they performed and where they stacked on the teams that they're coming from, none of those guys were the top targets. Just for whatever that's worth, these were not the number 1 receivers. You look at Trey Palmer in particular, he was about the third or fourth option. You look into his third quarter numbers, which third down numbers, which kind of gives you some idea anyways of hey, when you got to pick up a first, are you the guy that's targeted quite a bit or not? Are you guys that makes the play a lot or not? Right. So if you were to look at Jordan Westerkamp's third down numbers back in the day, they're probably pretty solid. Right.
They're nice.
Right. Trey Palmer only had 3 catches on third down out of his 30-something. Okay, so I know he's fast. I know he's 10-3. I know he's a 4-star. I know he's got a nice punt return and a kick return for a touchdown. I'm not saying he's a dynamic athlete. But in terms of being this top-shelf number 1 wide receiver, he hasn't shown it yet. Maybe he will be that guy, but it's not like that's a no-brainer that it's just going to happen, right? Isaiah Garcia Castaneda at New Mexico State, pretty lowly program. He was the number 2 guy. He only had 3 or 4 touchdowns, right? Marcus Washington had 18 catches. Out of those 3 dudes, only one of them has a 100-yard game. Marcus Washington against Kansas. And you remember that shootout, Texas and Kansas, where it was just back and forth. Balls, I think Casey had 500-plus yards or something passing. So all that said is yes, you're bringing in some talent, but I don't know who the number 1 guy is going to be. And to have it be this foregone conclusion that it's definitely Trey Palmer when he hasn't really shown that he is that guy or can be that guy, it just makes me wonder. It just makes me wonder how it's going to shake out. Who is going to be your top target? Do you really have game breakers? Because I don't see a lot of huge plays out of that crew either. In terms of long plays of 20-plus yards or so, it feels like you're getting quite a few guys that have some dependability, but it kind of looks like it might be more of a station-to-station, chunk-by-chunk type offense than some sort of, oh, God, there goes Trey Palmer for 80 yards or 70 yards, unless something drastically changes.
Well, and there's an expectation that they are going to be able to transition into being the guy, right? And I think back, case in point is Stanley Morgan, right? Look at Sunday Stan. And Stan in that 2016 season, he was fantastic. And he was a number 3. He was a third option when you have Alonzo Moore, DeMornay Pearsonell. I think DeMornay got dinged, but you get what I'm saying. And oh, yeah, by the way, you had Jordan Westerkamp. Think of that receivers room, and you had Riley. So you had all of those options, and you got to check everybody on third down. And Stanley was huge. And then you look at Stanley by his senior year as the de facto number 1. The guy who went out, earned it, was Nebraska's top wide receiver. You know what type of season he had. I mean, the guy had the first 1,000-yard receiving season in Nebraska football history for a wideout. It just doesn't, you don't snap your fingers and poof, just because you run a 10-4 or because you're a 5-star or because you've shown flashes, you don't have the consistency. It's not that you can't go do it, but to expect you to just step in and kill it is unfair. And to your point, Nebraska's got a number of those guys that, okay, this is a different setting. Like you can look back and project fairly based on production what somebody was going to do. And you can do that with some of the transfers, but Kraynak, with your data, that's very fair to question. All right, can all of these talented guys that just have incredible physical skills come in, know an offense, learn an offense, get on the same page with a new quarterback, new coordinator, new position coach in some instances, and go get it done in the Big Ten. Go get it done against Oklahoma. So, yeah, it's okay to be weary, but that's really no fun. It's more fun to just say, yeah, they're going to come in and kill it. It'll work out.
Well, and obviously a lot of that has to do with who was your quarterback, what was the protection like, what's the design of your offense, all those things are factors, right? And Mark Whipple, the offensive coordinator coming from Pitt, obviously had no issues targeting one dude and making him the number one, right? The Biletnikoff winner that had 7 million catches for 5 billion yards. He's not above doing that, right? Like so that tells me like if you got something that works, stick with it. That's promising. I just don't know, and I don't think we can say and I've just heard so many times like, oh, got Trey Palmer, good, number one target, yeah. You're just like, well, you don't really know if that's the case yet. We don't really know if he's going to be the guy that can grab that. I
think Mickey can get him there. Mickey can get him there. I think Mickey can do his part with coaching up these guys and blending their talent with the day-to-day. Elijah, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, and Mark, I just want to pose the question to you, get your thoughts on this. Is it important for Nebraska to have a number one guy next season? I mean, I think back the last time Nebraska really truly had a true number one guy was probably Stanley Morgan. You can make the argument last year for Samori Toure being the number one guy, but he wasn't a clear-cut number one guy. So do you think Nebraska needs to establish a number one receiver next year to be successful?
I think it's really helpful. Because I think when you have that opens up everybody else. Like if you have that one dude, like think when you were playing Purdue and there's Rondale Moore, like you are dedicating at least one human being to that, probably more, and you are just making sure that dude does not get loose, right? And then that opens up David Bell and some other. So I think it would be extremely helpful for Nebraska to have that dude rather than a station-to-station kind of controlled passing attack where you're just chipping away, because that just increases the number of times that the ball's in the air, that increases the chances for things to go wrong. So, yeah, I feel like you do want that number one target, and then you want that number one target, that clear number one target. And then you want a bunch of dudes behind that, okay, if you're going to dedicate a bunch of space and resources to stopping Trey Palmer, awesome, because now we got these other four dudes like an Omar Manning or whoever that's going to really hurt you.
And Mark, just another question to pose to you is, are we forgetting a position group here in terms of the pass catchers? I'm not saying a tight end, that's where I'm going here, but I'm not saying a tight end is going to be the number one guy in terms of stats. But do you think a tight end could be the guy that Casey Thompson leans on in terms of that reliable target that on third down is going to be open? I mean, look back at Pitt's stats last year. Their number two guy was Jared Wayne from the wide receiver room, 47 catches. But their number three guy, if you can call it that, was Lucas Kroll, their tight end, with 38 catches. And he wasn't as much of a deep threat, but in terms of catches per game, he's on a similar level to a guy like Jared Wayne. And when you have Jordan Addison, you're going to want to find a number two guy, a more convenient check down, which is the tight end. But do you think a tight end could be that guy that steps up and is the reliable target for Casey Thompson when you look at both Vokalek and maybe the emergence of Thomas Fidone next season?
Yeah, it could be. And Vokalek is kind of that quintessential, like when you think of a tight end, he's exactly what you think of, right? Not necessarily a game breaker, but really good size, really physical, reliable pass catcher, right? That's what he is. So yeah, it would be awesome if you could do that. But it's just when you're just trying to project, you take this Scott Frost offense, you kind of mix it and match it with the Mark Whipple offense, and then you bring in these three guys at the receiver position that were productive, but were not they weren't game breakers. They just weren't. And Nebraska doesn't necessarily bring back game breakers, right? Omar Manning, for all his talent, had 2 touchdowns last year.
And that's Nebraska went to him when they needed him. I think of the big catch against Michigan. You think of the touchdown against Oklahoma. So the talent's there, but we get back to consistency. And is he a well you can keep tapping into? I think he can be. Same with Martin, right? I mean, if Oliver stays healthy, that guy's got some skills. So there's plenty
Alante Brown.
Yeah, Alante Brown too. I mean, there's plenty of bodies to pick from, but we're in a group of guys that it's their time to step forward and seize that 1, 2, 3 option and then let it let it work in your favor matchup-wise as the season moves forward. And great if you want to say Palmer's the number one and gets off to a great start, and Oklahoma's like, well, dude, we better pay attention to Palmer. Good. Then, all right, is there Martin or a Manning or, Castaneves or Vokalek that steps forward and becomes a real big problem because he has the matchup advantage. I want to go to quarterbacks. We started the day off talking quarterbacks, and I think we'll end it. And we're not going to belabor the Adrian comments or overreact to them, but let's talk grades for a moment, okay? If you were to put a grade on Nebraska's quarterback play, what grade do you put on the quarterback play? And then with the unknowns, whether Purdy makes this thing interesting race-wise, whether Thompson seizes it, or whether it's Logan that has something left to say in that quarterback room or other, right? You still have Harburg. You still have some other options. If I'm going to say quarterback play grade Nebraska's had during these sub-500 seasons, it'd probably be C+, maybe a B, okay? There was some good and some bad. What grade do you give Nebraska, and what grade do they need to be not just 6-6, but a little bit better, so there's a little sigh of relief moving forward with this bigger picture discussion that's still the elephant in the room with Nebraska in 2022. I think you need B+ quarterback play, and that's not throwing for 350 and an 80% completion percentage. But to me, it's more about, all right, give me about 65-70% completion percentage, have time, but it's really you've got to be in single digit turnover wise. That's fumbles and interceptions combined for the season. That's my key. I need a 3-to-1 ratio, rushing or passing touchdowns to turnover numbers. That's the play Nebraska needs. Of course, it hinges on what type of running game you get, and to your point, Mark, if someone emerges as a true number one that's never been a number one.
When you look at Adrian on the whole, and let's break it down into like three different categories that would allow you to arrive at that 1 to 10 ranking, right? So you got like game management, you got sort of dynamic playmaking ability, and then you got clutch performance, right? The three, let's just use those three.
Sure.
With Adrian, dynamic playmaking ability, 10.
Yep.
1 to 10. Come on. That dude had some incredible big moments, big plays. Game management, whoa. Now we're sinking down to like a 4, a 5.
Well, and turnovers and clutch, I mean, you're probably...
Clutch, you're like at a 1.
You're 1 or 2.
Right? And so you look at that spread, and that's an EKG reading. I mean, that's just like... Whoa, boom, boom. That's whiplash. That is so difficult.
You're passing, but it's nothing to put on the old fridge.
So what you need now, give me a 5 for clutch, for game management, right? A 6, right? And give me 5s across the board. And I think you're okay. I would prefer that than that wild swing of like a 10 in terms of dynamic playmaking ability, but 1 in terms of clutch.
I mean,
Adrian Martinez had multiple opportunities to go win a game. Multiple. It just never happened. The clutch element did not come through. Is it all on him? I don't know.
Probably not. It's not. It's not all on him.
It's probably not.
But fives across the board is what wins in the Big Ten.
Right?
Considering the rest of your quarterback peer group.
Yeah.
You've got Captain Morgan that's in his 37th year at Minnesota. Iowa and Wisconsin have not been quarterback-centric. That's not why they've won ball games. So, see where it can go. Kraynak, have a good weekend of baseball, brother.
Godspeed, sir. You too.
All right. Elijah, thanks so much. Back at you Monday on Hail Varsity.
A Hurrdat Media Production.